Hello, welcome back to learning to program using the Godot game programming engine. Alright, in this video we're going to continue on the AdventureWorld project, our 2D platformer. And in the last video we added the ability to switch scenes from level 1 to level 2. And at the end we left with the problem that if I portal out from like level 2 and I come back to level 1, I always spawn back in that initial position. So between videos I did some research and found kind of what I would guess is the most accepted ways of doing this, and I found two different ways, but they both use a feature of Godot called AutoLoad. And autoloads are a type of singleton, which is a programming concept. And this is how you get to the autoloads, and those are left over from my testing. So this is how you get to the autoload, and the way that we add one is we need to add a script, or we need to create a script. So I'm going to go to my script tab, I'm going to go File, New. Now in this case I'm not actually adding it to a node, so previously we've always added it to a node, but in this case I'm just going to create one out of the blue. And I've got a utility folder here, so I'm going to put it in there, and I'm going to call this scene loader. Alright, and I'm going to hit save. So I've got utils, scene loader, create. And this is just of type node. I'm going to delete all this stuff. I'm actually going to pull it in from a copy that I had. Now, I've got in the documentation here that I've pulled this from the Godot documentation, and I did. So I was searching around for a solution to this, and I found this this link to the Godot documentation, and it just happens that one of their main examples is a custom scene switcher. And the reason for this is I found out that when you do a change scene, so back here on our goal flag, we were doing getTree.changeScene, and that changes to this target scene. The problem is this this action right here is what's called deferred. So it doesn't actually happen here. So if I did a print statement right here, I wouldn't actually be in the new scene when this printed. I would still be in the old scene. And what happens is Godot waits until all of the this frame, so all the different scripts have run on this in this scene, and then at the end it runs all the deferred methods, and in this case this change scene is a deferred method, or inside of this change scene is a deferred method, and that's when it actually moves to the next scene. So if I put a, if I say move my player to the spawn location here, it won't actually move him because it hasn't changed and the scene is not into the new scene yet. So what I've got to do is I've got to store that information somewhere outside of this particular scene in any of the scripts in this scene. And the way I do that is with AutoLoads. So I just created that new script called scene loader, and I'm going to paste in, let's see, I'm going to paste all this in to here. There we go. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go up here to scene, or excuse me, project settings, AutoLoad, and then here for the path I'm going to find that scene loader I just created, and then it gives it a name, and I'm going to click add, and I want to make sure that enable is on for the, and there you can see that singleton that I talked about. And that's just a programming concept that means there can only be one of these at any time, and it's automatically created. And you can move them up and down, and I think that's for the order that they load in. So if you have one that depends on another one, you want to make sure that that one's at the top. Alright, so in this script there's a lot of code here, but don't get overwhelmed because we don't really need to know a lot about this. This is just kind of boilerplate stuff that's taken from Godot. The only thing I added was this function right here, and then down here at the bottom I added to trigger that function. So I could have called this whatever I wanted, but I wanted to kind of keep in line with the naming scheme. So what happens here is when the this node first starts, so on the first game start, it gets the current scene and loads it into this current scene. So whichever scene I have defined, which would be in my case level 1 as my starting scene, and it'll load that and stuff it into this current scene. Then when you trigger this load scene function, we'll see how to do that in just a second, it's going to and this is my custom code right here to store the spawn name of where we're going to move our player to. But then after that, it uses this called deferred, much like what I was talking about before, and then this function right here is called later after the scene has finished executing all the other scripts. So what it does is it deletes that current scene, so like level 1 would be destroyed. Then it gets a resource to level 2, so it loads level 2, and then it creates an instance of it. This is a lot like when we spawn objects in code. Actually, it's just like that. And then here it's adding that child to the root, alright, and then it's setting the current scene, and so this just this is part of Godot's standard API, and this just kind of keeps compliance there. And then I trigger my custom function to to fire off this code when the scene is completed. So in this case, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, if there's one of these spawn groups defined, then I want to get my player, and I do that by getting all the nodes that have the word player for the group, and then I just get the first one using the front command. And here I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it with that spawn group name. And I'm getting the first one, and then I'm taking the position of that spawn location and setting it to the player position. So pretty easy code there. I know this is a long line, but it's pretty simple in what it's doing. And the reason I used groups is because you can't reference a specific node. So if I wanted to say like right, let's see, well actually we need to set one up, so let's do that. So I'm in level 1 and I want to define a position to spawn at. So I'm going to use a position 2D, which we've used before I believe, and they're basically just node 2Ds. They don't do anything except they have a visual indicator, so I can see right there on my screen where it's at, where if I used just a node 2D, they're actually invisible. So I've got my position 2D, and I can name this, so I could do like spawn to position 2D, or I could just call it spawn. Let's just call it spawn for simplicity's sake. I'm going to set the group here, and I'm going to call it second spawn. And now I need to define in level 2 to come back to this guy. So over here in level 2, I've got my goal flag, and right now I don't have a second variable to set to go there. So let's add that real quick. So right here I'm exporting the string for the file for the scene. So let's export another string, and I'm not going to put that qualifier on it that it's a file or anything, because this is just a group. So this is the target group spawn group. Alright, and I don't need to change, well, this is going to change because we're going to call our scene loader, but we'll do that in a second. So I'm going to go back to my interface, click there, and now I have this new target spawn group. And so let's set that to, what was it, second spawn, I believe. Alright, so now what I'd like to happen is when I hit this goal flag, the goal flag is going to trigger this code, and it's going to detect that it's my player, and it's going to change the scene, and then it's going to go back to, and I want it to appear here at this second spawn position, which is defined by second spawn. Alright, so what there's two ways I could do this, and the first is, let's pull back open the scene loader. So the first is using this custom scene loader, and then at the end I've added my own code to execute after the scene is loaded, and in this case it's going to go find a player and move him to that spawn group that's been defined. So let's call our load scene function here. So it's load scene. So what I need to do is go into the goal flag code right here, and instead of this I'm going to say scene loader, and you notice I have IntelliSense there, or I get the hint right there, and I can even do, what did I say, load scene. There we go. And then it'll tell me which variables I need. So I need the scene path, which is going to be the same thing as it is before, to load. And then I need the spawn group name, which I did, what was it? Second spawn, right? Now in this case, I've hard-coded it, so I'll always go there. So I don't actually want that. What I really want is this. I want this right there, the target spawn group. So now what should happen is when I hit that flag, it should go into my code here, called my load scene, and then that will go over here to this load scene right here. It will store in this variable the spawn group, and then it'll go ahead and call this deferred method, and then at the end of the deferred method it will pull that spawn group name to find the node and move my player there. So let's see if this works. I'm going to run over here, and that one should work fine. And when I hit there, alright, so this time I spawned over here instead of over here, whereas my default, I now spawned on the new one. So the whole reason I did this was so that I can move this position over here closer to my flag, so it appears like you're popping out of the cave instead of there we go. So it appears more natural that you're coming out of the previous zone where you were. I probably should have used a door instead of a flag. We can change that later. So that's pretty neat, and I like that, except we've got some extra. This scene loader is very custom to this type of game, and there's really no way around that. And it's going to be that way in the other version too. But this one has a lot of kind of scary code. Like all this is kind of a little bit scary. It's not too bad because we're really just instancing a resource and then adding it here to our root. But let's look at another way. So another way is we don't even need this. We can get rid of this. We don't need the current scene, but we do still need our spawn group, because we need to preserve somewhere outside of our scene where we'd like to end up. And so then down here, I still need my load scene, but we're going to change it. And we don't need this at all, so this whole deferred method can go away. And we don't need the call to the deferred method, but we still want to do the get tree dot change scene. You're like, well, that's what we were using before, and that's correct, except that we're kind of intercepting that call and storing this spawn group name outside of that. And technically we could put this in our own code, and just instead of this being a scene loader, we could just use this this singleton as a storage area. So we're kind of going to do that. But one problem here is if I added finished loading right here, this function here, I'd still be back to square one. This wouldn't trigger after the scene loaded. It would trigger before the scene loaded. So this isn't going to do me any good anymore. So what I need to do is find a place that will trigger after the new scene has loaded. And can you think of where that might be? Alright, it's inside the new scene. So if I go to level 1, any script that is in here that has a ready function will execute after the new scene is loaded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it into my player script. So if I go in here to my player script, you notice I've got a ready function that we had from before that we never used, and I'm going to start using it now. So what I need to change is I need to, instead of the spawn group name doesn't exist here, it's not a variable up here, so what I need to do is I need to access my scene loader. So I'm going to say scene loader dot spawn group name. Yep, spawn group name. And so if scene loader spawn group name has a name, then I want to use it, and I need to use it right there as well. And so I don't need to get my player, because this is the player, right? Because I'm running the script on the player, so I don't need to get the player. And I also don't need to get reference the player right there, because this is the player. So the position that I'm setting here is the position of the player. But I still need this spawn target position, so this is all good. Alright, so I've simplified my code a little bit. Let's see if it still works. So I'm going to go back to my scene loader. I don't even need this function anymore. So all I need is just this, and this is no longer from the Godot documents. This is just something we did. So let's play this. Alright, so I start at my normal location. Go in here, that still works. And now I'm at my target location. So awesome. So that works too. So I would probably suggest going this route. The problem is every page that you load on, you'll have to have, or every scene that you make, you'll have to make sure that somewhere you've got code that figures out where things are, or where you would want to spawn in, or if you're passing something else, if you're not passing just the spawn location of the player, you'd have to have those scripts somewhere in this new level in order to take advantage of or read those values out of your singleton, which is in my case the scene loader, and use those. So yeah, I kind of like this method a little bit better. I think it's a little bit cleaner, but like I said, you do need to make sure you take advantage of these. And you could even, instead of calling this scene loader, you could just call these like global properties or something. And we may look at that in the future, but I think for now this will work just fine. A couple things I wanted to do while we were in the code before we move on. I think I mentioned working on some water that your player could fall in, but a couple things I wanted to take care of while we were in here. I noticed when I'm running through my bushes, they play an animation, and then at the end of the animation they send a message, and we don't need that anymore. So let's delete this track. Nope, I want to delete oh, here we go. Remove selection. Oh, maybe. Oh, here we go. Remove selected track. That took far too long for me to find. Alright, so I removed my function call there. I don't need that anymore. I can also go up here, and I believe on my script I had an end bush move. Don't need that anymore. We still need this, because this is what actually triggers off the animation to play. And let's see, so I've got my, clean that up, so that'll be a little bit more efficient. I won't get those logging messages every time my player runs through a bush. And let's see, what else do I have? There's something else I wanted to clean up. Oh yeah, so back here in my root folder, kind of got a mess going on, and I have this goal, and I was like, what is this? And I looked into it, and I was starting to implement basically the flag. So we already had that kind of there, and so let's get rid of that, because that's not oops, didn't mean to do that. Here we go, delete. So we don't need those files, and we still got a little bit of a mess because we've got our players laying here, and bushes and goal flags and all that's laying right here in the root. And as we get more and more objects into our game, it's going to be harder to keep track of those. So I created a little objects folder here by right-clicking new folder, typed objects. So I've got an object folder. Let's move these in here. Now Godot's smart enough that when I move files, it will keep the references intact. So for instance, level 1 referenced this bush, right? This bush scene. But that bush scene is not in the same place anymore. Now it figured out that I moved it here, and so now it's referenced there in the objects folder. So that's excellent. I'm going to leave the tile set, and well, I guess the tile set's about the only thing at the root now. We could create another folder for it, but I think the root will be fine for the moment. One other thing I wanted to do, now that we've cleaned this up, is I've got this utilities folder, and I've got my scene loader in there. There's some other utilities that I'd been using, and I really like this process, and it's kind of a feature of Godot. So I've got another project, and I'd written these two scripts, and what I did is instead of writing them as GD files, I actually wrote them as scene files. And so what you can do is just drag them from one project into another, and you get the scene files here, and then you can add them to your scenes by just dragging and dropping them in, and you'll gain all the functionality that's already predefined inside that node. Now the way this works, or the reason this works, is when I created my scripts. So let me go back and let's create a new one. So add, the way I created these, I just do a normal node, so it doesn't have anything to do with 2D or 3D, it's just a normal node. And then when I attach a script, instead of defining a path, I use this built-in script, right? So now there's no file that goes along with it, but there's still a script here, and you notice it's got kind of a funky name over here when you save it. It's got GD script, and then it's got a number. And that's just telling you that there's no file associated with this, but it is a script that's attached to that node. Anyways, this script is embedded inside of this tscene file, so I'm going to delete this node. And let's take a look at these that I've created. So I'm going to go into, this is the exit game key. So there's a lot here. But this is really the only code that, this is the bulk of the code right here. So what's happening is I have a process function, and I'm looking for the action just pressed game exit, and when it does get tree quit. So you notice whenever you play a Godot game, there's really no way to get out of it, and the reason I went full screen is because of this one. There's really no way to get out of it, and when you go full screen, it's even harder to get out of your game. You have to hit like Alt F4 if you're on Windows, which is the Windows command to close Windows, or Alt Tab and right click on it and kill it. But most games have, if you hit the exit key, the game will exit. So this little node, all you have to do is drag it into your scene, and all of a sudden you have this capability to exit your game by just hitting the escape key. So that's really neat. I like that. But you're wondering, what is all this code up here? Well, this action, game exit, is not actually defined in my project input map. So if you look through here, by default, there's just a bunch of these UI underscore actions, but there's no game exit. And so what I did is this code right here, the first line checks to see if that action exists. So it says has action game exit equals false. So if it's not there, then I print a message saying that I'm adding it, and then I go ahead and add it into the input map, and then I define a key, which I just have hard coded to the escape key, and I assign that to that action. And so that means that by default I can hit the escape key and exit. However, because I did this as an action, and I check to see if it's there before I go adding this key, I can actually come up to project settings, create an action that's named the same, so it needs to be game exit, and I add that, and now here I can add whatever key I want. So I could add say the P key will now exit my game. So when I play, the escape key doesn't do anything, but if I hit the P key, my game will close. So that's really clever. I like that capability, and it's real easy to add into new games. So let's look at this other one. This other one is very similar, same idea, except this one sets the os.window full screen, and then the not is just the opposite of whatever it currently is. So if it's full screen and you hit this button, then it'll switch to windowed, and if it's windowed, then it'll switch to full screen. And I added this little bit up here, so it's got an export variable that says full screen on start with the default set of true, and then and then on ready it sets window full screen to whatever you assigned it to. And the nice thing about this is over here, when you click on this node, here in the inspector you've got full screen on start, and it's got a checkbox for if you want it to start full screen or not. So in this case, let me uncheck that, and now I'm in windowed mode. But if I check it, then I'll be in full screen. And then if I hit the F key, which is what I have defined, I'll switch between full screen and windowed mode. And so there's my key F that I'm predefining. And just like the other one, you can override this full screen toggle button in your input map and control what key is used. And these are real simple. You probably, if you had a bigger project, you couldn't use these because you may have, with the escape key, you may want it to go to a menu instead of exiting straight out of the game. And with the full screen toggle, one thing I just thought of, if you have this defined on each scene and you load, say I go from level 1 to level 2 and I've got this and it's different on each one, or the person had toggled out of full screen, then that new level would force them into full screen again, which would be kind of frustrating. So in order to handle that, you would probably want to move this up into one of those auto loads here. So you might want to have like a screen handler auto load and that could handle your full screen toggle. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I think I'm going to wrap up there. I think this cleans up our project quite a bit. So we've got a couple little extra tools in there, so our game loads. Game's a little bit more pleasant to use. We've got our scenes moving. We can control where our spawn point is, and I think we're ready to move on. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.